Hello! It's Joseph.
Doing another one of these.
I've really enjoyed doing these nondescript discussion videos. They're nice. All the trappings and cadence of an extremely pretentious video essay, but none of that pesky research. The only thing I've learned over my 6 years with this channel is that my greatest strength is rambling, so let's do some more of that. Today we're going to talk about good decks. Real quick, I don't mean that. Semantic discussion about what Yu-Gi-Oh players classify as a good deck or a bad deck, it's not interesting. Oh, what a surprise. Some people use good to mean top tier, and other people use good to mean the deck doesn't explode when you draw your opening hand. Who cares? I want to talk about what decks we consider to be good. Good meaning that they occupy a particular position in our psyche. They're the decks we think of when we think of the top tier of metagame contention. And I also want to talk about why Yu-Gi-Oh players are uniquely bad at performing that calculus. First up, let's talk about social constructs. I promise this is important. So for those of you in my audience who are just 14 years old or otherwise extremely dumb, what is a social construct? Social construct is a construct that we socially agree upon. Okay, that's not helpful. Easiest way to understand a social construct is it's just a thing that we all do or believe and reinforce through continuous social performance. Like Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is a social construct. It's not like a real thing. You know, there's no innate natural desire to celebrate Valentine's Day. You know, there's not like a gene sequence in our DNA that spells out "Buy Hershey's." But it's something we do and perform, and by virtue of that performance, it becomes real. A lot of people, when they hear social construct, they go, "Oh my God, you're saying it's fake?" Not in any way that matters. Like, Valentine's Day is a social construct, but it can still be very painful if you don't get any Valentines, which I'm sure no one in my audience of Yu-Gi-Oh playing individuals has ever had an experience with. So there's a ton of social constructs that can impact our lives in a ton of different ways. Property law is a social construct, race is a social construct, and the metagame is a social construct as well. Let me tell you a story. So in 2016, I was wrapping up college. I played Yu-Gi-Oh pretty frequently with my friend Saurabh Pasikani, who has a bunch of YCS tops, and my friend Gavin, who is notorious on this channel. The Monarch Structure deck had just come out, and we were loosely aware of the fact that it was expected to be one of the top decks in the upcoming format. Saurabh decided to start one-tricking that strategy, and we came to a consensus pretty early on that the best deck in the room was going to be Domain Monarch, and the second best deck was obviously going to be Volcanic. This was because in our metagame of 3, Volcanic had a pretty good matchup versus Monarch. It could remove the individual Monarchs by virtue of Volcanic's Scattershot. It could outdraw them over the course of multiple turns. The floodgates that it played were particularly strong against it, and you could even board into something like Mask of Restrict. What we expected to be the third best deck of that format was, unsurprisingly, Ritual Beast. Should it win the die roll, it could easily set up Ulti Canahawk, which could get you 2 Steeds, which could pop the domain and unlock your extra deck for future turns. And its unique ability to dodge removal meant that it wasn't completely hosed by the AoE removal played by Volcanic. Confident we'd come to a pretty good understanding of the metagame, we walked into a regional and got absolutely slaughtered by Burning Abyss like 6 rounds in a row. Us here meaning me and Gavin. I think Saurabh did fine. So what had happened there? Well, my friends and I had participated in an instance of social construction. We had developed a metagame between ourselves. Unfortunately, once we walked into a regional, we realized it had no connection to the wider Yu-Gi playing public and got absolutely butt blasted for it. I'd like to propose something interesting. I think all metagames are like this. The metagame we developed in our college dormitory had no resemblance to reality, but a significant amount of the metagames that existed in real life had no resemblance to reality as well. Look at SJC Edison and how powerful decks like Gadgets and Quick Draw Dandy Warrior looked, and look how transformed the metagame has become once people put additional attention into that format. See, Yu-Gi-Oh players operate under a delusion that there exists something called a good deck, a deck that is playable and powerful under all circumstances. Press a little further and you'll find it's a tautology. I hope it's a tautology. I'm really just itching to use that word. A deck is innately good because it performs at an event, but it only performs at an event because it's innately good. In reality, a deck's performance can be ascribed to a number of things. There's just a few. Timing. If it comes out in a new format, then people are obviously going to be a little unfamiliar with newer cards, and you can maybe get some wins that way. The previous week's results, after Monodium had a really good YCS run, people played Droll and Lockbird for a week, and decks that beat Droll did really well. Top player opinions and comments. If Pack releases a video the night before a YCS that says Infernoble is playable, people are going to have board plans for it. Type of event. If it's a 6-round regional, a powerful combo deck can easily just win 6 die rolls and go off. I mean, not to get all Beaudry art or whatever, but it's crazy that online simulators are dominated dominated by decks that are just not considered good by the wider player base at all. Runic Stun is nabbing Worlds invites in Master Duel. I just looked at the top match on Dueling Book, and it was between two people with like 1700 rating playing a Math Mech Ditto. I posted something to this effect on Twitter, and Ryan Yu, who is a much better player than me, hand-waved this away by saying, yes, sometimes because of X or Y, a deck is more viable than one that's legitimately viable. But what does that mean? Legitimately viable here refers to some sort of innate power that a deck holds, but no deck exists in a vacuum. Sometimes adaptability of lines is more important than strength of an end board, but it doesn't mean that one is way more powerful than the other. I think Rika, the deck he describes, is a perfect example of this. It's hard to intuit how to play against it is a real strength. Side note, this deck's been out for 2 years. You all need to learn how to play against it. The end result is that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Playing community does not take very many decks seriously, instead refusing to engage with decks outside of a 6 or 7 deck repertoire that is expected to be innately good. Let's take a look at a parallel card game and see what happens when individuals are willing to invest the time to get good at and understand decks that we would paper over. Magic the Gathering has a number of formats, but the one that I think is the most analogous to Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Modern. Modern cuts off at the time when Magic started using their Modern card frame, and every card printed afterwards is legal, with the exception of an ever-evolving ban list. Modern is also in a historically bad state. While there's usually a significant amount of decks playable, right now one, Scam, they're calling this deck Scam, is far and away the best one. That said, there are still like 30 decks that individuals can expect to play against when entering a Modern tournament, and each of those decks is expected to have the capacity to win a large event. That's right, Magic the Gathering is experiencing an equivalent of a Tier 0 format, and they are still spending more time than we do evaluating cards. If you ask a Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro what their testing regimen looks like, they'll probably rattle off the name of 6 or 7 decks that they intend to test heavy against. Which begs the question, well, it's not because of a lack of options. I think, like in Magic the Gathering, there's probably about 30 decks that could win a YCS under certain conditions. The problem is there is no parallel infrastructure to Magic the Gatherings. There's no one like Shock Troopa who will innovate on a single deck for a literal decade. There's no rush for pros to perfect a deck like Crack Clan Ironworks combo. Dedicated Yu-Gi-Oh! One-tricks are usually playing anime bullshit, comically bad archetypes, or lack the drive to innovate on their chosen deck. There's also no time to innovate. Cards come out at lightning speed and have to be evaluated in a context that includes 12,000 other playables. For instance, the only reason we ever knew Monadium was busted was there were a few duelists like Triff who were already dedicating their life to one-tricking it. And finally, this is the big one. There are just no tournaments. The reason people believed Truman Show Yu-Gi-Oh! And similar conspiracy theories is there is a very select group of people who can consistently play against other high-powered individuals, and there's no inroad for mid-tier players to get an obscene amount of reps against quality opponents at a moment's notice. If you go to a high-powered local, you can participate in like one event a week and maybe play some pickup games with some of the individuals who were there. But for almost Magic the Gathering's entire lifespan, there have been on-demand queues for every major format anytime. There are dailies, there are weeklies, there are events. What do we have in Yu-Gi-Oh? The DC Cup once a quarter? And it's just a ladder system. The end result is loose metagames. Makonko wins a YCS. Fluandereeze wins a YCS. Monadium almost wins a YCS. The next week, Infernoble almost wins a YCS. VW's topping. Generator wins a remote event. Vlad won a giant card with Melfi. Horus Bestial has double-digit tops, but it is receiving next to no coverage. If you genuinely think we've come to something resembling a correct ultimate truth of the current metagame, I implore you to ask what Jeff Jones would have said about SJC Edison before he won it. Probably something along the lines of course Quick Draw Dandy Warrior is the top pick for Edison. It's got the best gadget matchup. So, what does this mean? Even if the metagame is a social construct developed around the opinions of a handful of professional players and personalities who are playing what is pretty much analogous to dorm room Yu-Gi-Oh!, what does that change? If those players are still consistently performing and topping tournaments, clearly they must be doing something right, right? Well, yeah, obviously. They're really good at the card game, but understand that when they divulge to you the top picks for this format, what they're describing is a series of decks that performed in a testing circle made up of other decks they developed. They might be telling you to play Monarch because it has a good Volcanic matchup. As a result, when performing deck selection, you should keep an open mind. If you're considering not playing X or Y strategy because you think your deck isn't strong enough, weigh your options. The difference between the top decks isn't so large that it's very possible the difference in your play might outweigh it. Innovate. Do not just play cards because you saw them in a Jesse Cotton video. Or worse, an MBT video. Develop the skills that allow you to evaluate cards in the first place and apply them. And 3, this one's a little more nebulous, push organizations to develop the infrastructure necessary for innovation to happen. You won't be able to get the large amount of data or consistent reps against good players necessary to make conclusions about what decks may or may not be being overlooked unless the foundational infrastructure to allow that to happen exists. Push Konami for a Master Duel tournament mode. Try and get organizations akin to Luxury to start up an online tournament series. Fucking anything other than the latter, man. I promise the end result of this type of innovation and consistent practice is worth it. It'll result in a metagame that is not only a lot more diverse than the one we're currently experiencing, but also one full of better players. Right now, often it feels like a significant amount of duelists in any given YCS are basically just playing a deck they picked up for the first time last week because they heard it was strong. Expanding the understanding of what decks are playable for a large-scale event and encouraging individuals to get really good at them will absolutely elevate Yu-Gi-Oh! Popping to a new deck every week after you watch a tier list is not. And to drive that point home, here are the decks that have won YCSs since the most recent World Championship. Unchained, Fluandereeze, Rika, Rescue Ace, Mikanko, and Unchained. I think the metagame is a lot wider than the way we conceptualize it, and I think there will come a day when our top cuts look a lot more like moderns and a lot less like tier 0 tier limits. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye.